Hi, welcome to another episode of MYD Global. I'm your host, Leanne Hackman-Carty. When a disaster happens, there's so many different professionals that get involved in trying to fight the fires or deal with the floods. In this episode, I'm talking to Cathy Press. She's the CEO and owner of Chinook Helicopters. They do a lot of training of helicopter pilots in order to help them better understand how to fight fires, whether they're in a helicopter putting fire retardant on or scooping up water in a water bucket. And so I'm talking to Cathy today about what it takes, what the special requirements are for a pilot. So stay tuned. Hey, Cathy, nice to see you today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. And thanks for having me today.
Well, good. Well, before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background?
Started becoming a pilot when I was about 16 years old. I went solo, and on my 17th birthday, I was issued a private and helicopter and airplane license. I continued on, and today I'm a flight test examiner on both airplanes and helicopters. I run a business that does training for both types of aircraft. And obviously today we're talking about the forest fire sector, and helicopters play a huge part in that. That's a large part of the business in Canada. And so we do a lot of the training on that side.
Well, so you run Chinook Helicopters, and I know that's an interesting story. So can you just tell a little bit about the background of the company and your
Well,
involvement?
I grew up around aviation. My father was in the float plane business and then got into the helicopter business when I was about 13. And from there, I grew up around the business, and I eventually took over the business in '98 for my father. And that was, I guess that's about 22 years ago now. It grew from approximately a couple of helicopters to what do we have now? We have about 13 aircraft on the helicopter side and about 14 on the fixed wing side. So we've grown substantially. We have 25% of the market for the flight training on the helicopter side, and we're actually noted as one of the top 10 in the world at what we do.
Wow, that's fantastic. I bet your dad was very happy to see his daughter follow in his footsteps.
Well, maybe, although I don't think it's never quite good enough. So we'll just keep on going. So maybe that's what's lended my perseverance and always wanting to sort of change and grow and develop things.
Yeah. So, okay, so when it comes to wildfires, I mean, they're very common in Alberta, in BC, California. Just curious, when you're training pilots, is there a certain type of training that they go through so they know what to do in these cases?
The fires themselves don't have a lot of specific training. It's actually the skill of the pilot themselves. So it's the basic skills of the mountain flying, and it's the long line skills, the skills that you have to pick up a water bucket and to be able to put it on a fire. There's also what's becoming a lot more popular worldwide is tanking, where the aircraft has a tank inside of it, and it has a snorkel, so you'll hover over a lake and what have you, and get the water inside the tank and then take it over to the fire. That's popular in Australia and several other countries. Canada tends to, on the helicopter, be very popular for the water buckets. And of course, the size of the water bucket is dependent on the size of the helicopter because of the weight that it can carry. So all of the training is usually the development of the skills in and around somebody having the skills to do the long line efforts. And it can be quite challenging, especially if you're asked to take water out of a bladder that's sitting on site. The skill level, because the size that you have to put the water bucket in is very small to put on the fire. And so really the cost for doing any sort of training on that is actually very expensive. And it's very often specific training is done on a yearly basis internally in the companies that do the firefighting training. On the firefighting side, we're seeing worse fires going longer, and this is being documented worldwide. A company next door to us that we work with sometimes is Conair Aviation. They are the largest in the world. They have aircraft on fires almost any time of the year because they're working in different parts of the world, and they are seeing fire behavior being worse and being more prolific and getting worse as time goes by. So it appears that it's something that a skill that people will have to continue to work toward.
Yeah, well, I remember in Fort McMurray, I did some work with them, and I recall them saying that fire had its own weather system. And
Yes. And actually, and this is one of the things I wanted to sort of talk about today, is the simulation. We've never been able to simulate fires, and it's starting. There's actually programs now that are coming out where fire behavior is written into the program of the simulator. So when you have specific winds going up specific valleys, and they're being modeled after actual fires. So they'll study a fire, much like Fort McMurray that you brought up, and then the pattern that they know it has taken, they're able to start writing different scripts for these to do training. And this is in a simulated environment. So we're actually in the middle of building a simulator that is a virtual reality helicopter firefighting sim, that when you have your goggles on, you'll be able to look around and pick up a water bucket, and then in a virtual world, and then actually go in to participate in a fire with several other fixed wing aircraft that are on the fire. So all the communication will be actual communication between all of the pilots, and even the ground people will be training for it, as well as the helicopter person is learning how to water bucket and drop water, and then the airplane people are all knowing where their pattern is, and the ground people are all running this as an exercise. So this is the first time that this has ever been done in a simulated environment. It's always being done in a real environment, which has had a huge cost, which has made it so that it's challenging to actually do the same level of training. So we're seeing a lot of these new products coming into the marketplace, and I think we'll only see more in the next couple of years.
that's awesome, because I mean, in your industry, it is life and death. You know, when you're talking, just a critical move could be very important.
Yes. And I mean, on the airplane side, if you take a heavily loaded aircraft with fire retardant and you fly straight into an uphill area with strange winds, it can be very dangerous. And for the helicopter, same thing. You have different winds, and you're at high gross weight, and a challenge that's been happening in the last couple of years is the reduced visibility. It makes it hard for everybody to see where everybody is. And so all of the increase in growth in the size of the fires is making the communication part much more important, to be communicating and knowing where everybody is.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So, you know, I think I wanted to do this topic with you today because I don't think people really think about this side of the equation, especially in forest fires. I mean, there are people in the air all the time helping to put out, whether it is that fire retardant or it's water bombers coming by, helping to maintain that perimeter, trying to contain the fire. And so the work you do is very critical. Now, this simulation piece, is that actually at your training school?
Yes, it's being built actually as we speak. So it's actually the first year that it's going into being used. It still has some bugs. It's still at a training, just using people that are still in the industry. It's not being used by outside people at this point because it's still in development. I would say by next year, it will be in a full development phase. We'd hope for a complete rollout for February of this year, but there's been delays, and being that it is the first time like it does have some bugs to be worked through. So we're quite confident it will be something in the future to really add value.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. So before we wrap up, is there anything else that I might not have asked you that you wanted to talk about?
I don't know exactly. I was just going to say that obviously from a pilot's perspective, a fire is very important, but on the other hand, from the life point of view of the person who's doing the job, you always have to remember it is a fire, and it is trees in most cases, so that you do have to always maintain your own personal safety. Whenever it does become an interface fire, where it's buildings and structures, or if you're trying to get people out, your level of engagement and importance, you all of a sudden realize that, and people do take it seriously. They do see the difference in what the fire is and what the level of importance is to the people that they're working for.
Yeah. Well, Cathy, thank you very much for taking the time today. Maybe we can do, once your simulator's up and going, we can do a segment on that and see how
Okay.
things are going.
Well, thank you very much for your time and have a really great day. And
Well, you too.
okay,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.